Today we take time to recognize the important role of the United States Coast Guard and honor them with the beautiful painting you see behind me. For that, I will call on the experts, and it's my absolute honor to introduce the President of St. Cloud State and retired Coast Guard Captain, Dr. Earl Potter.
Thank you, Eric. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I wear a lot of hats in my presence here today. I'm a member of the Adjutant General's Senior Advisory Task Force and have a deep sense of affection and respect for Camp Ripley. I am the president of St. Cloud State University, one of the 25 top military-friendly universities in the country, serving over 800 veterans every year, including many members of the Minnesota National Guard, current and former. And I recognize that among our attendees is one person who stands out bringing both of these worlds together, Representative Jeff Howe, an alum, Colonel Howe, member of the Minnesota National Guard, and also Representative Kresha, Representative O'Driscoll, and Representative Tice, former Representative Banyan. Thanks so much for being here. But today I am wearing this hat as a 24-year veteran of the United States Coast Guard. And I'm proud and privileged to represent and say thank you on behalf of the 88,000 men and women who serve in today's United States Coast Guard. Minnesota is an interesting state in that it is the Coast Guard coverage of Minnesota is split in half. This area of the state in the Great Lakes is under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard's 9th District, and the Mississippi Basin part of Minnesota and south under the Coast Guard's 8th District. I bring greetings from Admiral June Ryan, the commander of the Coast Guard's 9th District, who expresses regrets for not being able to be here today. But she and I have spoken, and she's really honored on behalf of the Coast Guard that the people of Minnesota have placed the Coast Guard alongside of its sister services here. That's where we belong. That's where the Coast Guard has been since its founding, serving alongside the other military services of the United States. Coast Guard's an interesting organization, difficult organization to understand because it's so many different things. And it's had a history that's varied and diverse, a little less straight line than the Navy or the Army. The Coast Guard was founded in 1790 as the Revenue Cutter Service at a time when the United States was starving for revenues. Smuggling and piracy were threats to the existence of the new nation. And the Revenue Cutter Service, its 10 cutters and crews, were put into service to get a grip on the revenues that the United States was losing. The Coast Guard is fond of saying to her sister service, the Navy, that it's the oldest continuous seagoing service in the United States. Because in the 1790s, the Navy was disbanded and did not exist as an organization, came back into being at the end of the 1790s. And in this sibling rivalry, the Navy often says of us that you have to be 6 feet tall to be in the Coast Guard so you can walk ashore when your boat sinks. I'm not 6 feet tall, which is why I went to diving school. And in fact, at the bottom of that painting, in the center of the painting, is the diving helmet that I learned to dive in the Navy Yard of Washington, D.C. many years ago. The Revenue Service evolved, and in the early 1800s, about 1840 or so, the Coast Guard began to operate differently because its commanding officers and ships were stationed in one area of the country, and they became independent and powerful in their own right. So the Coast Guard decided to begin to move them around across among different commands to break that personal grip on the assets of the service, and that's the way it's been ever since. The modern-day Coast Guard was created in 1915 by putting together the life-saving service and the revenue marine service, the revenue cutter service. Coast Guard ships are still called cutters, by the way, because that's the form of the original sailing ships. They were cutters. They were single-masted ships with double jibs, double foresails, and the 10 ships that originally built, one of them in Newburyport, Massachusetts, where I enjoyed living for a few years, that name has persisted throughout history. So the Coast Guard was formed in 1915 as a combination of the life-saving service and the revenue cutter service. In 1939, the lighthouse service was added, and the service continues to evolve. I have fondness for the old life-saving service because that service saved the crew from the wreck of the James A. Potter, named after my great-great-grandfather, when it went aground on Long Island in the North Atlantic. Coast Guard's been present in every war that we fought since its founding, and has served in surprising places. I'm just going to give you a quick summary of my own career, just to give you some sense of what the Coast Guard does. I went into the Coast Guard in 1969, trained in New Jersey, New York, and Virginia before being signed to a ship in Alaska. A little bit like the Coast Guard cutter Alder, whose representatives are here. It was a buoy tender. Coast Guard refers to those as the Black Hull Fleet of the Coast Guard. They did search and rescue, fisheries interdiction. If you've seen Coast Guard Alaska, that was my life back then, and aids to navigation. From there, I went to diving school for service on a polar icebreaker and served 2 tours in the Antarctic. You don't think necessarily of the Coast Guard in the Antarctic. I was the diving officer in that ship, and then I went to ashore in the Pacific Northwest to graduate school and to the faculty at the Coast Guard Academy, where I served for 16 years, part of it as executive officer of the Coast Guard's tall ship, the Eagle, and sailed that ship to Australia in 1986 to participate in front of the royal family in the celebration of Australia's 200th birthday. My son's also a Coast Guard officer, lives in a very different Coast Guard than I did. I served on World War II era ships. He's the commanding officer of the Coast Guard cutter Robert Yared in Miami, one of the Coast Guard's newest ships, a fast response cutter of 154 feet with a crew of 40 that engages in drug interdiction of illegal immigrants fleeing Cuba and other Caribbean islands, and working in partnership with the Navy. His ship interdicted $10 million of drugs this past summer in partnership with the Panamanian Navy. As a young lieutenant, he was the aide to the Coast Guard Pacific Area Commander, and in that role traveled with the Admiral to India to look at Pacific security and worked with others on Arctic security and the opening of the Arctic. So the Coast Guard is truly a global service. Our name is Coast Guard, but we serve far from our coasts all around the world. And to those Coast Guard active duty members who are here, to those whose family members have served in the Coast Guard, to those who are here who have served in the Coast Guard, thank you for your service. It's an important asset for the United States. We are humble, proud to be small, flexible, responsive, and we no longer say, however, you got to go out, but you don't have to come back. Because now we want every single one of our people back. And we don't say that anymore. But we are honored, and the people of the Coast Guard thank you for placing us together with our sister services in this very important space, important to the people of Minnesota. I appreciate Mr. Kapsner's eye and what the complexity he's brought to this vision with so many different parts of the Coast Guard, a varied and profoundly important service. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Potter. I think it's very fitting that we have a Coast Guard veteran who's also deeply involved with education speaking at this event, as these paintings will also serve as an important educational tool for generations to come. So once again, thank you, Dr. Potter. It took many people to make this art project happen, but an art project would not be possible if there's not an artist that was capable and willing to take on such a large project. I'm sure sometimes doubted his original decision to take on the project. I'll make this introduction short, as I think most people here are very familiar with our next speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce, as he would like me to say, as simply as the artist, Mr. Charles Caxton.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for being here today to celebrate the installation of the Coast Guard painting and to honor the men and women of the Coast Guard. As we see, 3 of the 5 paintings are now in this building, and it gives us a great sense of what this place is going to look like when all 5 are finally in here. And I'm truly happy to see all of you here to see this. As I look around and see veterans and active duty personnel from all branches, and note especially the proud ranks of the Coast Guard, and thank them for their tremendous contributions to maritime safety, security, and environmental stewardship. A point that may not well be known is that the Coast Guard is the only military organization within the Department of Homeland Security, and since 1790 have safeguarded our nation's maritime interests and environment around the world. I take special note to honor the memory of those veterans, while not physically with us, remain very much in spirit with us in this hallowed space. I thank the honor guards who have traveled here from around the area and appreciate the presence from the Duluth-based Coast Guard cutter Alder, which is Minnesota's only cutter but traverses all of the Great Lakes. To each and every veteran, thank you. At this point, I'd like to be able to talk a little bit about the painting. I want to thank Dr. Potter for really taking care of most of my job on that. So you have that on tape, I'm sure, Jim, so we can copy that down. Before I do talk a little bit about it, Semper Paratus always means ready, and he changed knowing they go out but may not come back. That was changed in part of today's presentation also. But it's very important to be able to look at what we have in front of us here, going back to 1790. So when you look around the room, the other paintings, they give us back to 1775. This figure up above me takes us back to roughly the late 18th century when the Coast Guard began, which was mentioned 1790, but it was August 4th, 1790. And they've had many duties, as Dr. Potter had expressed to us or explained to us. But in the meantime, some of the things I'd like to show is we talk about the environment. So therefore, we have the seagull representing the air, we have the polar bear, and we have the whale tail. We have the Split Rock Lighthouse, which is something I felt very important to put in because Minnesota is represented in each of these paintings some way or another. So that was important to have that. So as Dr. Potter mentioned, the Revenue Cutter Service, but then we have the the United States Rescue Service, which that scene right there is depicting a scene from October 1896 of a rescue scene that happened off the coast of Cape Hatteras. And at that point, the individuals involved in it was an African-American team, and they thought, well, if we're going to go out and get these people, we need to tie ourselves to something on land and together, so not only do we get them back, we get back. So that's what that depicts, and I'd actually seen the original painting of that back in 6 years ago at the Naval Memorial Foundation Museum. Since 9/11, the Coast Guard has taken on many, many other duties. That's why it was important to have that there. We see the famed orange, white, and yellow chopper, which are their colors. We see a submarine. This is something that a lot of people may not know, but as soon as a nuclear-powered submarine does surface, it's the Coast Guard's charge, or the Coasties, to bring it in. So you'll see a number of those fast boats going around. You'll see some helicopters, and you'll see these huge boats flanking them called OSVs, which look like a huge wall that flank from the sail back on the submarines, because at that time, that's when they're most vulnerable to a missile attack, which could release nuclear radioactive particles into the atmosphere. So with that said, we also have a tribute to the Academy with someone playing the trumpet. We have Navy diving, we have firefighting, and then of course, again, guarding the coastline and a few other things. As with any dedication, it is time of both reflection and celebration. I can assure you that an 8 by 10 foot oil painting does not get done overnight, despite what rumors swirl to the contrary. that was a mouthful. It takes the dedicated effort of dreamers, believers, movers, framers, and really top-notch friends. Oh, and a few models help too. The movers, literally, Falls Furniture, Tom and Char Trutman, and Steve Zimmerman, who made sure the delivery van got a really big painting safely transported out of my studio to Duluth and back with a bit of weather-related delays, and finally here to the building. The cemetery staff, Kevin Doucette, Dennis Knowles, Steve Savish, and temporary for that afternoon, Staff Sergeant Timothy Croth, who was here to take pictures but ended up getting stuck up top to help us raise the painting. It's not as easy as banging a nail and hoping for the best. Nope, a skyjack, a really careful team out here makes hoisting a big heavy painting a lot easier. And the heavy part of the painting is not really what I did as far as the weight. The canvas itself probably weighs about 35 to maybe 50 pounds, but when you get that solid cherry wood framer on there, that adds about another 200 pounds on top of it. It was custom made by the molding by Brainerd Hardwood, and thanks to Tony Armagast and Ken Placecki, they cut it, crafted it, and the beautiful finish work, and of course Tony was out here that day helping us getting it installed. To Jim McAllister, has been a faithful videographer following me around and truly capturing the stories of the men and women of the military, and to my web guy, Chris Welch, who helps out my friend, my friend and wife, Catherine, as I keep walking through everything. I knew I'd say something wrong here, whatever. I blew it, whatever. Thank you. Okay, and now to the part, the project does require a few great models, and here today you can meet and converse with them and find out the behind-scenes work of the glamour of modeling and find out if any of them signed any contracts. I'd like to know that. Hiding in the back is Chad Bourne-Whiting, who is the figure right up behind me. He also modeled for the poses of the three here and for the gentleman climbing up the rigging on the Eagle. He also is he's two figures in the other two paintings, and so if you look at him, try and figure out where he is in the Army and where he is in the Navy. I want to thank also Staff Sergeant Kevin Hurt right here, who loaned himself from the Minnesota National Guard to stand in for a Coast Guard figure. To Lauren Brady right over here, who is playing the trumpet and has been in the Coast Guard now for 9 years. Vanessa Gans, where's Vanessa? Oh, there she is, right over there. Who's the lady wearing all of the diving gear, and to Jack Ring, thank him for the tanks and other things like that. So are there any models from, oh yes, where is Tara? Right behind. She is up in the Navy. Is anyone else here that I can't see in the crowd that's in one of these paintings? Oh, there he is, Bob. Okay, Bob Mueller. Matter of fact, he's up there, World War I, Korean War, modeled for the homeless veteran, and part of the front pose, if I remember correctly. So thank all of you. Oh, Mary, I didn't see it. And then we have Molly Pitcher back there. I didn't see her. She was hiding in the crowd there. Oh, Howard right there. Howard, thank you. Like I said, I can't see through the crowd here. Thank you very much. And of course, Howard is right up there in the Navy.
Mark Stump is here too.
Oh. Oh, Barb. Okay. No, Ray's widow. Thank you for Ray. Ray's here in spirit as always. And as a matter of fact, he brought Vanessa to my studio. So Ray is still helping out on the project. Thank you again, Ray. So take note, I'll be getting ready to do the Marine Corps next and then Air Force, so I'll be looking for some more models. In closing, the paintings you see around today are intended to bring the viewer inside to visually focus on the enduring impact of our nation's servicemen and women, not only during the time of their service, but long after. The Coast Guard's contributions, along with the Merchant Marine, are honored and remembered here today and take into account over 2 centuries of dedicated service in keeping our nation secure. Yet whatever your branch of service, these paintings highlight your contributions, achievements, and sacrifices. They are your stories, and I thank you for letting me tell them in this way. Thank you very much. One quick, before I forget, also for those who don't, the tribute to the Merchant Marine is right here with the patch and the Liberty class ship up top. So for those wondering, there they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kapsner. You've done a phenomenal job with this painting, and I think all of our prior, current, and future Coast Guard members will be proud to have it as a monument to their service for a long time to come. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for being here to honor the United States Coast Guard and celebrate the installation of their painting. Special thank you to our speakers, our special guests, also to the honor guards that have been here. And also, so everybody knows, there is going to be a reception at the Little Falls American Legion at 3 o'clock that everyone's welcome to join. I'm sure Charles is ready to relax for a moment and have a glass of wine. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate everything.